Shelton and this new series that we are hosting called Eye to Eye, and it's so lovely to be. This is a reunion for Lynn and I because we did an event several years ago in London for the Sundance Film Festival, and I've been a fan forever, so I'm going to fangirl away, Lynn, but we'll get back to that and we will actually have a proper serious conversation. So my name's Mia Bays, for those people who don't know me, and I run Bird's Eye View. And Bird's Eye View started life as a film festival showing films by women, and now we pivoted in 2015 into being a year-round operation that backs the releases of films by women and campaigns for gender equality in film, particularly around the female perspective. So for us, our big mission is called Reclaim the Frame, and that is particularly named recognizing as people in the film industry that who is powerful are the people who decide what goes in the frame. So for us, it's about centering films that are written by women, directed by women, or stories or books based on books by women. And we are backed by the British Film Institute. So we are a charity, it's not for profit. So we invest our money, we don't take any money out. And, you know, we back films from all over the world in cinemas. And now, of course, all our beloved cinemas are closed. So we're recalibrating everything online. So it's wonderful to be able to do this with you remotely, because we're all remote right now. I haven't had a hug in weeks. So this is a digital hug, Lynn. So yeah, like.
I actually have a friend, they have a routine where they hug themselves, close their eyes really tightly and imagine they're hugging.
Okay, we'll try that. Yeah, that's nice. Okay, there you go. So this is called Eye to Eye because I'm also a filmmaker. So I recognize the complexities of putting those darn movies together and how, you know, so we can have a really in-depth conversation. I don't want to get too kind of nerdy because I feel like, you know, our audience is also interested in lots of different areas. And I think there's loads of other aspects. Like what we try to focus on is kind of why films are made and kind of the meaning and the feelings behind them, and less about the specifics. Like I don't really care even as a filmmaker if you shot for 40 days.
Right. All that.
And how much it cost. Like I don't care. So yeah. Sorry guys, switch off if that's what you're here for, because you're not going to get too much of that. But you're going to get loads of other juicy stuff. So it's going to be way more interesting. So and I also wanted to welcome actually people who are hard of hearing and deaf. There is a link above the screen where you're seeing this, which is a live subtitling service. So please click on that link. And welcome to all of our viewers. And so we've connected. And we talked a little bit earlier about this is a reunion. So Lynn, first of all, can we just start, for those of you who haven't had the pleasure of your work, so we're going to talk about your 8 movies and a lot of television. So we'll come back to the TV. I'm going to focus mainly on the movies. But what are the need to know details about Lynn Shelton, the woman?
The need to know details about.
Or a filmmaker, yeah.
Well, I mean, I think something that makes me feel unique to myself when I think about, you know, there's so many different roads to becoming a filmmaker. So I think an important part of my story is that I came to filmmaking quite late, relatively. Like when I was out with my first feature film, I felt like I was hanging out with a lot of 25-year-old men, and I was, you know, young white men, and I was a 40-year-old, you know, mother and wife, and I had a long circuitous route to becoming a feature filmmaker. I didn't go to film school. I had my own kind of devising of a film school, which I didn't realize at the time was film school, but I got a BA in the theater, an undergraduate degree in the theater as an actor. So I started as an actor for the stage. And then I ended up, once I tried to start making a living at that, I grew up in Seattle, Washington in the United States. And then I moved to New York to be an actor, and immediately fell out of love with acting because just wasn't good for my mental health. I found I was getting an eating disorder, and It felt like an exercise in narcissism. And I didn't like the powerlessness of the fact that you couldn't. I hated auditioning. I didn't have the constitution for it. And I'd always been a photographer. So I kind of transferred my addiction, to being on the stage over to photography, and then went to graduate school in photography and really took that very seriously. Went to the School of Visual Arts, which is in New York City. And they had a very open-ended approach and to photography. And I ended up going into experimental film, experimental video, and my marketable skill coming out. I was making very non-commercial work, like personal documentaries and experimental documentaries, experimental shorts. But my marketable skill was editing. So then I was an editor for many years and for corporate commercial stuff. But then I got married and had a kid and moved back to my hometown of Seattle. And being in that small regional space, I think really helped to not be in New York, not be in LA. Mm-hmm. I became a smaller fish in a big pond and started to get the opportunity to edit feature films. So I edited 2 feature films. I edited several narrative shorts. And that was when I started to realize, and I saw Claire Denis, who came to town in around 2000, 2002, maybe in Seattle, and did a little, they had a retrospective of her work, and they had an interview with her, and I got a chance to meet her. And when I realized that she was 40 when she made her first feature film, that changed everything for me, because I thought it was too late for me. I was in my late 30s, and I thought, well, I can't have a filmmaking career. So the combination of being in Seattle and getting the opportunities that I got as a regional, in a smaller regional film market, with a very kind of cohesive and community-oriented filmmaking, all the people who ended up being my crew were my best friends, so it wasn't people that I was hiring and paying an enormous amount of money. And, all my movies ended up being very sort of the early films, and really all of them ended up being very kind of DIY, grabbing people I loved and borrowing equipment and saying, let's make a movie, So I didn't have to go through the traditional process of writing a script and then going around begging for millions of dollars and, and banging on the walls of patriarchy. And, I didn't have to ask.
Yeah, they're thick, aren't they? Really thick and really high.
Yeah, they are. So yeah, I just made work on my own terms. And then the turning point for me came, and I was freelance editing, and then I should say that the opportunity came to me, a really remarkable opportunity that, I'm still pinching myself that this happened, but in Seattle for a very short period of time, there was a nonprofit film studio, and they basically commissioned me to write and direct my first feature. So it was an extraordinary opportunity that really opened up a whole world to me, because I'd made a bunch of films, but everything had been solo. I was a solo artist basically. And then I understood filmmaking, cinematic storytelling from the post side, and I cannot recommend being an editor more, I can't, before you actually start directing narrative work. I don't see how I could be a director if I hadn't been an editor before. So that was really great. But then to actually my first day on my feature film set was really the first time, I introduced myself to everybody. And then I remember distinctly, saying, "Oh, what's your name? Ryan, what do you do?" "I'm a gaffer, the gaffer." And I said, "Oh, that's great. What's a gaffer?" Like I literally had no idea what it was to work with a crew. And I'm such a control freak that it was terrifying to work with this, have to be so collaborative, but it was also unbelievably liberating. And it changed my life. Like from that point on, that was 2005. And I knew I would never make another piece of art again alone, that it was all going to be about relationship. And, and my first AD and I set this very positive set culture, and it was just it was a completely life-changing experience. And it was so strange to sort of feel on day 2 or 3 or 4 of being on that set, oh, this is what I was always meant to do. but I couldn't do, I don't think I could have done it any earlier, because the other part of that story, the last thing I'll say, since we're talking about female filmmaking, is I don't think I would have been capable. I wasn't comfortable enough in my own skin, and I didn't feel like culture had given me permission as a young woman to do what I was able to do later. You know, I had to gain the confidence of age and wisdom, and also like, oh, okay, I can be, you know, this is the kind of feminist I want to be. This is the kind of whatever. I mean, I was just so lost in a lot of ways in searching for my identity and how to be comfortable with myself and my own skin as a woman when I was younger. And I had to go through certain phases of development for myself. I'm not saying that's everybody's story at all, but for me, it was like, it was daunting to be a female in the world when I was younger.
Yes. Yeah, it just takes I mean, you know, filmmaking, even the kind of films like you're making in the early days, there's still a lot of money, right? You have to go through so many kind of checks and balances, you know, to persuade people, you know, like half of the job is like, 3/4 of the job is not being on set. It's all of the other stuff around it, right? And that's the stuff that takes the confidence, like the lead of it.
Yeah, exactly. This is to be able to just stand there and say and own, my story is worth telling. You know, I'm gonna get this whole, I'm comfortable with this team of people helping me fulfill my vision. It's a really, I don't know, it's something that I just didn't have, the confidence to do earlier. And it absolutely makes my heart soar when I see very young female filmmakers now just, you know, getting up there and getting their bullhorn and going for it. It just makes me so happy. And I don't know if it, I think it is a cultural shift. I think it's also more role models like yourself and myself. I mean, I think that helps a lot as well, but it's very encouraging.
Mm-hmm. So the film you're talking about is Hump Day, which is just so terrific. I mean, for those people who haven't seen it, it's just so wonderful.
Well, Hump Day is actually my third film.
Okay, third, right? Okay, wow.
My breakout film. So that was the next thing I was going to say, is that my first film was called We Go Way Back, and it went to the Slam Dance Film Festival, which is like the Rock Little Sister festival of Sundance. It happens at the same time in the same place, Park City, Utah. And I won the grand jury prize that year, and as well as the Best Cinematography Award. And that film was the only film I ever shot on 35mm film. And I just saw it again recently. There was a retrospective of my work here in LA last summer, and it was so wonderful to see it again. And there are parts of it that I was still figuring out how to do it. I'd never read the script before. And so there's certain parts of it that make me feel, oh yeah, that feels like a first-time filmmaker. And there are other parts of it that just blow me away, that I'm just like, wow. And a lot of it was that I wanted to retain my, I felt like a deep connection to my experimental filmmaking roots. So there's aspects of it that are very like, oh, this is really bold. Like I can see why it picked up a few awards on the regional film circuit, and people really, there's still people in my life who say it's their favorite of all my movies. And then my second film was called My Effortless Brilliance. And my idea, that was the first film I made that was completely improvised. It was built around actors. So one of the things that I felt was lacking in my first film was that We Go Way Back was a traditionally scripted film. And I liked the script. I felt like it was a well-written script, but you could feel the writing more often than I wanted. Right. And I wanted that to disappear. I wanted it to feel like a documentary. I wanted to make a film that felt completely and utterly real. And so I decided to try an experiment. And I kind of used the aesthetical guidelines of Dogma, 95 cinema. I stripped away everything, as many crew as I could, as many pieces of equipment as I could. And I just took these small digital cameras and went out into the woods with a very small handful of friends and built the characters with the actors, and then sort of created a narrative for them. So it's a little lacking, and there's not much in plot that happens. But it went to South by Southwest. It got into narrative competition, and then IFC bought it. And that just gave me permission to then further go down that road of making a movie in that way. And that's where Hump Day came from. And Hump Day changed my life because it got into Sundance and in 2009. And I suddenly, when you get into Sundance with a feature, it changes everything. You suddenly have reps interested. And so suddenly I had, you know, the opportunity to acquire agents and a manager and start to try to see if I could work in television and make a living at it. Because I hadn't made a living so far, you know, in 3 films, I hadn't made a living. So sorry, just a sidebar that it took a while. And I don't think my first film, I don't think I would have been, I submitted to Sundance, but I wouldn't have been ready because I had so much to learn about how to put a film into the world. Like I didn't know about getting a sales agent or getting press, you know, publicist or any of that. I had to sort of learn along the way. So.
Yeah, I mean, actually, so apologies for thinking Hump Day is your first, because I think actually in research, it's like that's the first one that's available. Like, so actually a big part of what we focus on is distribution, because I don't want to get lost in the distribution wormhole with you, but, you know, a massive problem is who polices what gets seen. And then when great work is made, then it just disappears forever, especially films by women. So those films aren't available. Hump Day is available. So, you know, even those, you know, and you're well known now, and that's kind of crazy that still in the UK, one of the biggest film territories in the world, I can't see your work.
Right.
You know, so the challenges are kind of myriad, aren't they? Like half of it is making the films and the impact you make at a festival, and then the next bit is how do you reach your audience?
Exactly. Absolutely. Yeah, and it's really and like that we could get into an entire hour of talking about Netflix, for instance, and how, I mean, I have friends who've created films that they produced, that Netflix produced, beautiful films, and because it just went straight to Netflix and it wasn't like Roma and, you know, promoted in any kind of special way, it's like those films just disappeared. It's hard for the filmmakers to feel like it kind of happened a little bit for me with Outside In.
Yeah.
Last film I made, which I worked with the great Edie Falco, and I think it's the best performance. I'm biased, but I do think it's her best performance ever. And that's saying a lot. It's Edie Falco. And I've had many, many people say that to me. And I feel like, I feel like nobody saw it. I don't know if anybody saw it because Netflix doesn't let you know, but they depend on their algorithm as opposed to any kind of promotion. And that's their game plan. That's how they survive in the world. And I understand that, but it's just, as a filmmaker, it's sort of heartbreaking because you just have no idea, there's no sense of, has it found an audience? Do people know it exists? Sometimes it can feel like it just disappears into a black hole. On the other hand, these friends of mine, and not Netflix didn't make my film, but they had a strong relationship with the Duplass Brothers who produced it. And so different thing. But for my friends who had Netflix actually produce those films and give them a decent budget and, gave them pretty much everything they wanted to make the film they wanted to make, they may not have been able to make that film at all had it not been that support. It's like, is it worth making the film of your dreams if you don't know if anybody saw it or not? I don't know. It's a very interesting time right now to try to sort that out.
Yeah. I mean, can we zero in on Outside In actually? Because I think now is a good time to talk about that film and people finding films like that, because none of us can go to the cinema. So that's why we all need to shout out great films that, I agree with you. Outside In, I only saw recently because I didn't even know it was around. And I know your work and I'm a fan.
Yeah.
And so because the platform's just so massive, things just get lost, right? But that film is extraordinary. It's your first drama, right?
Yeah, my only drama so far.
Right. I mean, it's just, I mean, it's like effortlessly made, Lynn. It really is, because it feels effortless. It obviously wasn't. It's extreme craft, but it feels so naturalistic. And her character, like, can we just start with, like, where did her character come from? Like, how did that evolve?
You know, I actually had been thinking a lot about, I mean, I've always been interested in relationships that are not unorthodox relationships that aren't supposed to work, and not just romantic, but just some sort of soul connection, some sort of human soul connection between two people from very disparate, you know, cultures or ages, or, you know, these sort of, Harold and Maude is a great, you know, sort of, it's a very different kind of film because it's very sort of broad and a little bit, you know, it's a different tonally sort of film for sure. But that made a huge impact on me as a kid. And I also was interested in two people falling in love who didn't have access to each other physically, who literally couldn't touch each other, or much less have sex or even kiss, you know. The idea of an epistemological, is that what you call it? Like Eloise and Abelard, like this sort of like just a letter writing kind of thing. And then all the I don't know, all the different ways that, I mean, it really sort of started honestly with Jay Duplass's character, the fellow who goes away to, I mean, simply because I wanted to work with Jay. That's the reason that movie exists. So a lot of times, I mean, I'd have to go through my head, except for not the first film for sure, but several of my other films, and Laggy's was a script that came to me, and that was a different process. But there was most of my other films all come from a desire to work with a specific actor or two. I'm very driven by, I get very, I'm a real actor geek as a director. So I get very inspired by particular performers, and they become a kind of muse for me. And I want to build something for them and around them. So a lot of times I'll come to somebody with a very sort of rough pitch that could be one sentence, you know. And that's what happened with Jay. I came to Jay Duplass. I'd worked with his brother Mark Duplass a couple of times. And then I'd known Jay as a filmmaker, but Jay came to acting sort of later, and he was on this wonderful Amazon show, Transparent. I don't know if you guys have it there or not. Yeah. And first time I saw him on Transparent, I couldn't believe what a beautiful actor he was. And I already knew him as a human being, and he was such a lovely, sort of soulful guy. And I told him, I'm going to be lightly stalking you until I figure out a way for us to work together. And it was a couple years later that I came to him with this idea, and it was just sort of the backstory of the film, really, and everything that happens up to the start of the film. Now this guy gets out of prison after being in for 20 years for something he really didn't do, or he was in too long for, you know, sort of was over incarcerated, and the only person who's kept him going, you know, is this woman, is his English teacher from high school, and he's just so focused on her and so in love with her, but they've never said it out loud, you know. So anyway, just want to make sure I don't have to sign for this package. He just waved at me through the window. So anyway, it really started with him. And I came to him and said, would you be interested in a character like this? It would be a real sort of stretch for you because you haven't done anything, you know, it's out of your range of your sort of comfort zone, or your you know, your experience really in life. And he was terrified and definitely excited immediately. And he said, could we also produce it? And I said, yeah, sure. I don't have a producer yet. So that was how that sort of started. And then Edie actually came relatively late. It was really hard to find the perfect person for that role.
Wow.
Of Carol. And And she and Jay had worked on another movie together. Oh my gosh, Landline, Gillian Robespierre's movie, and had only been in a couple of scenes, but it really hit it off. And she was excited by the idea of working with him because they'd already had a connection. And I don't think she even knew my work, but she loved the character and loved the script. And she, so she, and then she really brought herself to it too. Although I will say, the first time I talked to her on via Skype, she was in New York and I was in Seattle, and I wanted to talk to her about how she saw herself in terms of hair and costumes and, and makeup and that kind of thing. And she really just said, look, I might be one of those rare, I might be a rare species in the actor, world, but I really just leave it all in your hands. So whatever you want to do, I'm down for. And I really wanted her unadorned. I really wanted her to feel like an every woman. And what's so remarkable to me is that, and every review brought this up. We got a lot of, that's the other heartbreaking thing, Mia, is that the reviews were so stellar. It just got so much love. Both at TIFF, where it premiered worldwide, and then it went to the South by Southwest Film Festival for the US premiere, and then we launched it after that. And they called her things like, they said, a luminous Edie Falco. They called her, she's so beautiful, she's so stunning, and she's just completely, just that sort of unglossy or glamorous or finished. I was just so grateful to her, but she really knew who that person was on the inside. And she really found the inner layers of Carol, as any great actress will.
And you kind of, it is in parts, it sort of veers into kind of love triangle territory. It's very complicated dynamics, and you just I just believed it. I really believed it. And I think that's so hard to do. And so I wondered, how do you get those? So much of it is the writing, but it's also then the performance. And does having been an actor help? Does it help, do you think?
I think it definitely helps. If nothing else, really the real crux of it, though, to be totally honest, is understanding how hard acting is, on a very deep level. I always say that everyone's working their ass off on set, but nobody has a harder job than the actor. And it's really easy to forget that when you're working with, especially when you're working with really, really good actors.
Yep.
Because they just make it seem like breathing.
Yep.
And they're so effortless in their performance that you just kind of can forget that they're going through anything, or that it's hard. Well, they're just saying words, or just standing in front of the camera and thinking about how they look and then saying words or whatever. But it's so hard. And so whenever somebody asks, if I get an opportunity to act, over the years, I've tried to, I don't like to audition. So I probably, I'm not I'm not going to go out for parts, but occasionally somebody will ask me to do something, and, or force me. In my last film, my co-writer forced me to do a role. It's a whole other story, but I take the opportunity when I can, because it keeps me connected to the empathy of how hard it is to act. And then that leads me to keep that forefront in my mind when I'm creating the space for them to do their work. I like to really create a completely emotionally safe environment for them. And not just when the cameras are rolling, but really very, very important to me, that it's no toxicity, and there's no, that everybody understands that it's a performance before anything else. That's going to come first. And that's the most important thing, and creating that space for them. So that's how I think it mostly helps. Sometimes, I would say that my favorite book about directing actors is called Directing Actors by Judith Weston. And she just does a really nice, clear description as well of, I think creating empathy for actors and trying to describe for directors what it means, what it takes, and what's not helpful. This result direction and just saying, you just don't seem angry enough, is not helpful. Generally, that trying to give people more active direction adjustments, or an image, or just remembering what just happened before, that kind of there's some useful tips in there, really useful tips about what's going to possibly help an actor get to where they need to go. Although, I do break the rules all the time. I mean, I did, I'll do line readings occasionally, but only occasionally, and only when, you sort of get permission from the actor. I'll break all the rules, but it's good to keep in mind how it might screw up. If you do the bad things, it might end up just taking you down a whole other road, but it's all about just really trying to keep empathetic, I find. The other last thing I'll say about working with actors is that they all have such different processes. The first gig I ever had was on Mad Men, which is ridiculous in my mind's eye. But anyway, in my opinion, in terms of how lucky I was to get that gig. But it was such a masterclass in, here was this big ensemble. I had to work with so many different actors, all of them spectacularly talented. Every single one of them had a totally different way of working from every single other one. And that, I think, was when I got this image of, it's like there's a drawer full of keys and you're looking for the right key for each person, of like the right skeleton key or whatever, the little key that's going to help unlock their performance, so trying to sort of intuit or actually directly ask, you can certainly ask the actor, if you have any prep time with them at all, how do you like to work? How do you prefer to, what's going to help you? What's going to be helpful? What's going to be unhelpful to you? It's just another thing to keep in mind. There's no one way to work with actors.
Actually, a few people are asking you to repeat the title of that book and the author.
Sure. It's called Directing Actors, and it's by Judith Weston.
Great.
Weston.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Wow.
So can we switch to talking about Sword of Trust, which is your latest, and which is the first film in a while, I understand, where you used a kind of scriptment process. Yeah. So can you explain what that is and kind of why that felt right? Did you want to free yourself up from the constraints of the script because that's where you'd been with the outsider in, or was it just other motivations?
It was just a long-standing desire to go back. It had been a while since I'd made an improvised film.
Yep.
Or heavily improvised. And so my second film, My Effortless Brilliance, my third film, Hump Day, my fourth film, Your Sister's Sister, were all very either totally improvised or very heavily improvised, 75% improvised films. And the meaning that I had a very clear understanding and structured outline of some kind, whether it was a script, like with Hump Day, it was a 10-page description of what was going to happen in each scene. But with Your Sister's Sister, I had an 80-page script. And the understanding was we could just throw it out, the words, throughout the words. But the idea was that I needed a map, a very clear map of what needed to take place exposition-wise, and also like what tracks needed to be revealed or what actually had to happen. And then also the emotional journey, the arc of each scene. So I knew all of that. It wasn't, when I say improvised film, it's important for me to clarify that I'm not just showing up with this, one day on set and saying, well, what's going to happen in the story today? It's very tightly controlled in terms of what I want to take place plot-wise. But then I give the actors an incredible amount of freedom in how they the words they actually use, or how they actually can find their way through the beats of the scene. The last note I'll say about that is that there's also a tremendous amount of effort that's been put into backstory. So understanding what's happened, what's taken place in the relationships prior, if there have been pre-established relationships between Emily Blunt and Rosemary DeWitt's characters, their half sisters, and what's taken place, since they were born onwards. Or in the case of Sort of Trust, we've got a couple of established relationships. Cynthia and Mary are two women who have a relationship, a romantic relationship. They're domestic partners. And then we've got Mark Maron and John Bass's characters, Mel and Nathaniel, who are co-workers, right? So they each had a backstory of how that relationship developed and what their dynamic is. And then the individual characters, I work with each actor individually to figure out exactly who they are and what their backstory is and where they, why they are the way they are. So that's really important too. So everybody understands who they are and what happened up to this moment in the scene before I just say, okay, go. The advantages to improvising and to doing that is that there's just no other way to get this kind of dynamic, spontaneous feeling freshness. It's like the audience gets the sense of, I don't know what's going to happen next, because the actors didn't know what was going to happen next. They literally don't know what's going to come out of the other actor's mouth and what they're going to have to genuinely respond to or react to. There's no other way to keep people completely in the moment as performers as that. Because when you're working with a script and you're doing the same lines again and again and again, you're working, half of the work of the actor is to turn off, is to create that suspension of disbelief that you don't know what the other person's going to be saying to you. Yep. Already. You have to pretend like this is fresh information, but when you're improvising, it's really fresh. So it's just a quality that you just can't get in any other way. I have not found a way to capture that sort of realism in any other way. The challenges are tantamount. They're huge to do an improvised film because not every actor, in fact, very few actors I find can do it well.
Right.
And so there's that. Then there's also the terror of the tightrope walk of actually doing half of your writing. You've written what's going to happen, sort of plot wise, but the dialogue is being written on the day that you're shooting. And it's terrifying, because what if you don't get it? Or what if that magic moment doesn't happen? Or, and so you're sort of sometimes searching for it. And so when the first time, it was actually Mad Men, I remember I just made, let me see. Yeah, I just made it Hump Day. And the next real project, and then I did a web series for MTV that nobody saw that was also fully improvised. And so when I came onto the set of Mad Men and I had this beautifully written script and these amazing actors who said these lines as if they were fresh, it was like, oh my God, this is wonderful. What a relief not to be writing dialogue in the moment, and so I really have, I understand the pros and cons of working in both ways, and I'm open to, all of it, as long as you have a good script and great actors who can do that, alchemy, then fantastic. But I had been yearning to go back to the improvised, that special something, soissons that you get when you do an improvised movie. So I'd been collecting people that I knew were capable of writing, of improvising, and then vetted the other folks. Like I'd never worked with Gillian Bell, but Michaela Watkins, who's a good friend of mine, I'd worked with her on a television show called Casual, and I knew she was a great improviser. And she vetted Gillian Bell, who vetted John Bass, and then Mark Maron and I had worked together forever. And he was the reason that sort of trust exists at all, because he was my muse for that. And I wanted to make a movie with him very badly. And I created this role for him. I literally was in an Uber, the back of an Uber, which stopped in front of it, a stoplight. And I turned my head and there was this pawn shop, amazing looking pawn shop with a lot of character. And I saw him in there, you know, I was like, oh, Mark could be a pawnbroker,
Wow.
of course. And that was the impetus for the whole film.
Right.
But yeah, that was the last thing I'll say about improvising, in case we don't get back to this, is that I have a hard time imagining that I could be as good a director as I am, or as confident a director as I am, had I not had that editing background.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely could never, ever, ever imagine directing an improvised film successfully did I not have that editing background, because my editor brain is always, my wheels are always turning, and I'm sort of, you know, as I listen to the takes, and I've got two cameras too on each side of the conversation, whether it's dueling two shots or you know, one-on-one cross coverage. And but I'm just sort of like, okay, do I have enough to put together?
Wow, what a skill.
Because you'll end up, you know, going for,
Yeah.
I remember with Hump Day, there was one take that was like a 40-minute take that got cut down to a probably 7-minute scene. But I was just like, I didn't want to break the spell that the actors were in. They were in this bubble of, you know, and I was like, yeah, I'm not going to use this. I know I'm not going to use this, but oh, I'll use that, you know, and that, oh, I've got that. And then sometimes I'll go back and pick up a moment that I didn't quite get. But for the most part, I really like to let the actors sort of feel their way through the scene. And then it's okay, because I'm going to cut it down later.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Staying on Sword of Trust, that van scene where you have your 4 characters in that van, the revelations, I mean, you're watching Mark Maron's character having an epiphany about your character who is not present. It's just so remarkable. So I wanted to unpack that, because I just felt that scene is just remarkable on so many levels. If I can read your quote that a friend sent me recently, which is a James Baldwin quote from a book called Another Country, and it really reminded me of what happens to Mark in that scene, which is, the trouble with a secret life is that it is frequently a secret from the person who lives it, and not at all secret for the people he encounters, because he must encounter those people who see his secrecy before anything else. And that's such a that is what you do together in that scene. So can you just talk a bit about how did that come about? Because it really is extraordinary.
Well, Mark and I came up with the backstory of, you know, I built that character for Mark. So I let Mark know, I pitched it to him, this idea of who this guy was. And then this kind of, and you know, the other thing I wanted to do after Outside In was to make a comedy. I gave myself permission for the first time ever to actually make a comedy, which may sound odd because all my movies are comedies, but I guess I wanted to give myself permission to make a comedy caper, to make a comedy that was might go a little screwball, might go a little bit, you know, outsized in the plot. But the characters would still be very grounded, and it would be like normal people in over their heads, you know, maybe eccentric, interesting people, but they'd be kind of getting in over their heads on this crazy adventure. So it was just sort of a totally different kind of movie than this drama I had just made. So I pitched that genre and that kind of idea, the basic idea, to him, but mostly I pitched him this character. And when we started talking about backstory, we used a lot of Mark's own story, as one does. So he's 20 years sober himself, and he and Mel, the character, are not the same person by any means. But there was some overlap. You know, they both grew up in New Mexico. They both spent time in New York, and they both, you know, became recovered. Mark did not move to Alabama, but there were these overlaps. And then also when he was living in New York on the Lower East Side, the actor, when Mark was living down there, over there, he had access to the kinds of addicts that we ended up utilizing. You know, he sort of borrowed other people's, what he observed from other people's experience, namely heroin addicts, and sort of put them onto, we borrowed those stories and integrated them into the Mel and Deirdre story, and to each of their characters and their experience together, and the kind of weird bond that gets formed when people do hard drugs together they're in a romantic relationship. It's like this weird, inextricable thing that happens, sort of tragic bond that happens that doesn't happen in either way. So we talked about that kind of stuff, but a lot of not the details, like the details that he comes up with in the back of the van were things that he was able to sort of pull from his brain in the moment. It was kind of remarkable.
Wow.
And that scene, it's interesting because that was one of those scenes where the scriptment, I call it a scriptment because it's sort of half a script and half a treatment. And some of the scenes were actually pretty well scripted. In, like, for instance, the one scene that I have as an actor, as my character Deirdre, I come into the shop and the dialogue that we have, a lot of the dialogue that we use in the movie was actually written down. Like, you know, I'm not the Salvation Army, I can't help you out. There were a lot of those lines that were actually written. So that was a more heavily scripted scene. The van scene literally said they get to know each other in the back of the van. That was all it said in the scriptment.
Wow.
And we spent about 9 extremely uncomfortable hours in the back of the van. Those poor actors sitting on very hard surfaces in a very poorly air-conditioned, in fact, unair-conditioned, ultimately, studio in the back of a van, trying to find the scene. And then it really, as it turned out, like every single one of those characters ends up telling, in the course of our shooting, they ended up telling a big story from their past. And we played and played and played. It was the behemoth of the editing process to figure out what the version of, you know, and we cut it way, way down, and then we cut it back up again. And one of the biggest challenges was trying to find the balance of how much time to give before Mark's character Mel is able to vulnerably just tell this heartbreaking story to these strangers, you know. So sometimes when it was cut down too tightly, it felt unbelievable. You didn't believe that he would do that. And then when it was too long, it was just too long. It was too long a scene. So it was like, really, Tyler, my brilliant editor, and I just wrestled with that scene to get just the right balance. And then I think at one point we put a little time cut in so you get the sense that they've been in there longer, you know, but it was interesting because the purpose of that scene changed over time. I knew it was going to be an important scene, but I just didn't know exactly how it was going to function. The arc of these characters is that overall I knew was that they start out very guarded with each other, and then they end up learning that they have to trust each other, that trust is good, and they have to trust each other. They have to, you know, help each other out. And for Mel, who is the main character, his arc is going from one that's just very closed off. I'm a lone wolf. I'm just emotionally shut down, to somebody who's able to be a little bit, open himself up, at least, you know, from here to here, at least a little bit. And part of it is because these strangers he's been able to form this bond with these strangers. So once they get into the back of that van, by the time we really shot the whole thing pretty much in order. And by the time we got to that van scene, we knew, okay, this is the moment when they have to start to formulate intimacy and trust. And because they're all forced to be in this really scary, terrifying kind of situation together, that automatically helps to unlock it a little bit, you know, and then they each just kind of organically start to share. And the last thing I'll say about that scene, it was so physically uncomfortable. And by the end of the day, everybody was just like, and we've been And we've been going through take after take after take, starting with like sort of wider shots, dueling 2 shots of each side of them, and then getting into singles. And the performance that you see on screen is Mark's, one of the last things we shot in the day. And he was so incredibly exhausted and so frustrated and so angry, because anger is where he goes when he's uncomfortable and like, you know, frustrated. And he was able, I'm just still amazed. It's amazing to me that he was able to channel all of that into this deep sort of exhaustion and frustration of this character and heartbreak, you know, into this character's story. But as soon as we were done shooting, we're all just like hugging and going, oh my husband, you know, high fives. I can't believe we made it. It's like going to war or something. We look around and we say, where'd Mark go? And he had like run back to the jumped in his car and gone back to the hotel because he knew he just like exploded all over everybody because he was just so pent up with you know, with anger. Anyway, it was very funny. I always love that story because it's just such a testament to his, you know, professionalism as a performer to be able to work under those circumstances and in fact let those circumstances work for his performance. You know?
Yep. You do Men in Crisis incredibly well, Lynn. So can we just do a bit of man talk? Because I feel like, you know, I mean, he doesn't really know, Mel doesn't really know he's in crisis in sort of trust, but it becomes really kind of apparent that he is. He's kind of sort of a bit frozen, really. Is that a fair framework? And then Jay Duplass is obviously in crisis. We said, it's from imprisoned to free. What the hell do you do after that amount of time? Hump day, you know, I feel like you do that really well. So, like, where does this skill come from? And this fascination as well.
Yeah, well, I think starting with the skill, I do feel like there's maybe, there's no way to verify this. Although I will say it's interesting to watch the French version of Hump Day, which exists, called Do Not Disturb, written and directed by Yvon Attal, starring himself and Francois Cluzet. It's pretty amazing. I was able to do a double feature of his version and my version, and it was so fascinating to see them side by side.
Wow. Because
for a number of reasons. One, his budget was much bigger, and he moved things out of look. But it's really the same story. It's exactly the same story. It's very true to my film, plot-wise, except for a few key things that he shifted. And he said, "Oh, it's because I'm French and I had to do it for the French audience." But when you watch it, it's like, no, it's because you're a guy. It's like this is the man's version of that story versus the woman's.
Wow.
Version. And it's really fascinating me, I have to say. But so there's sort of one way to verify that. But I do think that, I mean, I'm not, you know, I used to say, I don't know how many, there's multiple, I don't know if you've heard of this, this theory of multiple intelligences, like different ways that people can be intelligent. And I don't know how smart I am in the other categories, but I do think that I have a pretty high score in the emotional intelligence.
Mm-hmm. I would concur.
And I feel like that really helps me. That's another way that it's helpful when I'm working with actors. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if it's sort of a maternal thing or what it is, but I do feel like there have been males, females too, but men are able to open up in a way sometimes with me that you know, I don't know if they're capable with other directors to do the same thing or not, or maybe I'm pushing them to do something different that they've ever been asked to do before, or, you know, but I am very interested in now leading to my fascination of men and what their psycho-emotional kind of situation is. Mm-hmm. Because raised as men, they are only allowed a certain number of ways to show feelings, a certain number of feelings and a certain way to show feelings. So in Hump Day, for instance, you've got two men who are deeply in love with each other platonically, but they really, really want to connect. And then they just keep getting in their own way. You know, they keep throwing up obstacles. Now, you know, because it also gets very complicated in terms of their sense of competition with each other. They're constantly trying to outdo each other and prove to the other that they're the bigger or the tougher or whatever. They're trying to outdo each other, you know. And then I sort of pushed through that bromance idea to, you know, say, well, they're going to outdo each other by doing each other. Like that's sort of what they decide the ultimate dare is, you know, to prove that they can something, I don't even know. But to me, that idea in general of people getting in the way of their own desire to emotionally connect is so tragic, and it's so human and real. And I feel like it happens more with men. You know, like if it was two women in Hump Day, I mean, it wouldn't have even happened. They just either would have had sex or they would have talked it through and been over with it. Like, but it was just with these two men in particular, there was something very interesting, and you know, there's so much there, grist for the mill in a male friendship. But here, Mel is such a great example of a guy who is he's just been hurt too many times, and he's finally just put this gigantic wall up. And it's not that women can't do that, but there's just something in particular about a guy of that age, a middle-aged guy who's just decided, this is the box, these are my walls, I'm all good, I'm shut up, I'm done, you know. And then when he does break down, the thing is that when you do see through, when the cracks are created in that male wall, there's something to me that's extra poignant, extra moving, to see that start to soften or to see that break through with cracks in it. I mean, I'm literally just trying to figure this out myself in this moment because I'm one of those artists who likes to make my work. I work from a very instinctual kind of place, and then smarter, more articulate people can analyze what I was trying to do a lot of times, or at least certain things that I was doing that I didn't even know I was doing. You know? So I am trying to articulate something that I don't know if I've ever fully articulated before, but any of it makes sense.
Yes, it definitely did. And actually, on that note, I mean, going back to, and J. Duplass's character in Outside In, he's kind of the reverse in that his projection on her, on Edie Falco's character, is just so extreme. That's kind of like, he's the opposite, you know, the other sort of version of like heteronormative male kind of sexuality / romance, which is kind of just like tunnel vision and irrational. So can you kind of talk about that version, because it's fascinatingly done?
Well, and there's a few things going on with him as well, because in our research about convicts and ex-cons, there's something that happens where a lot of times guys get in for very long sentences at very, very young ages. So, you know, in his case, he was 18. But when you get in at 17, 18, 19, 20, that's where you stop. Your social development stops there, and your psycho-emotional development. Now, obviously, you're growing up. You're becoming, you're aging and physically, and you're becoming a man, and then you have to deal with very grown-up things because you're in an incredibly stressful environment. But it's so traumatizing, and it's such a weird world that's very specific. It's like you go into survival mode, and you sort of, certain parts of your social development just literally are stunted. They just stop. And they're sort of abbreviated. So they come out of prison as grown men, but they are actually really stunted emotionally in their development as human beings. And they're adolescents in a very extreme way. So one of my favorite images in that film is him on his little bike. His
wonderful.
Which is such a teenage bike, and he's just this 40-year-old man riding around town on this bike, and it's just so, and he's, oh God, and it's the one time in the movie that it makes me cry every time when I see this montage of the first time he takes his bike out, and it's the first sort of sense of like freedom that you can feel him experiencing it, but it's also nostalgia, because it's the same town he grew up in. And the last time he drove this bike, it's the bike he had when he was a kid. So he's riding around, sort of recapturing this childhood that he missed, finishing out and closing out of. And it's so incredibly heartbreaking to me. But means that there's a genuine connection that can happen between him and Hildy, Edie's daughter, because played by the divine Caitlin Dever, who I met her when she came to be in my movie Laggies, and I was like, we are working together again. And I'd been like waiting to work with her again. And now she's getting some real attention, which is wonderful. It's just the best. But Caitlin's character, Hildy, was 18, the same age that he was when he went to prison. So there is a reason that they connect, because they're actually the same age emotionally. But because of that kind of, the reason I bring up that stunted emotional development that he has as a character is because he's sort of, I think that's where some of that focus, that romantic focus on this object of his desire, it comes from. It feels to me very teenage. It feels to me very like, that sort of crazy hormonal, like, you are the love of my life sort of focus. I think some of that is from there. And then the fact that he literally was abandoned by everybody, he didn't really, his mother was not a real mother. His dad is completely MIA, and his brother screwed him over. His brother didn't even want to, felt so guilty that he didn't want to come visit him. So he just didn't have anybody going. And the way that she, we had a very elaborate kind of backstory again of how the letters started, and that she saw in him in high school. She works in this very economically depressed town as a public high school teacher, and she has seen generation after generation, these kids, year after year, she sees these kids, most of whom don't get out of town, some of whom end up going into really dire straits, either become addicts from meth or opioids, or they go to crime, or both, or all of it. Then, some of them are able to maintain and do okay, and only a very few are going to get out and like go to college and maybe move away. And she, as being a true sort of great, really wonderful teacher with the spirit and the real sort of that beautiful soul of a teacher, sees a spark in this guy. He's one of those few people, that it's like actually an intellectual curiosity and a real sort of sense, a real intelligence and a real sort of curiosity about the world, that she kind of is like, oh, he might be one of those that does okay, and maybe gets out and goes to college, and maybe, and so she sort of, it wasn't that just he was any kid. It was that there was one of those kids that she really, as a teacher, saw, oh, I could really help this guy, or there's something there, So was particularly heartbroken when he ended up going, day of graduation, I think is what we were saying, is the day he goes on this bad, partying journey that ends up landing him in jail. And she's particularly kind of heartbroken about it as a teacher, but somebody who really felt a connection to this guy. So continuing starting by sort of continuing the class work, basically, and giving him books to read, and then, ways to think about those books, and maybe writing assignments. And it started as a very kind of pedagogical relationship, and then it just developed from there. But But because of the fact that she ends up being the only one who's feeding his spirit or his brain and then ultimately his heart, that he just, I think it was the combination of those things that made it really easy for us to imagine him just being completely focused on her when he gets out and unable to really, just blinders on. And the vulnerability that he showed, it was very, we had a screening of that film in New York, and my friend Peter Neufeld came in, who is one of the co-founders of the Innocence Project, and he's met a lot of convicts and ex-cons over the years. And I was really hoping that he was approving of the portrayal of that character, and he really felt like we hit the nail on the head. Some folks have felt like, well, he should have been angrier. He should have had more anger because of unjustness of his sentence. And my friend Peter said, no, if he had had more anger in him, he probably wouldn't have survived his sentence.
Right. Yep.
Because it just would have gotten him into too much trouble. So he just sort of hunkered into this kind of survival mode, but he had to have enough spirit in him and humor in him to get him through that, to get him out alive, basically, and in this any kind of functional state.
So it sounds like you do a lot of research, because the film's always the sense of place, and often like subtle kind of socio-economic commentary, like you just made there, and real situations. Feels very tangible that you've done the work. It sounds like is research often a big part of what you do? Like, is authenticity important to you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I can't say that I've given myself that many challenges in terms of needing to do incredibly deep dives, but even always having technical advisors, for sure, certainly to make it believable that an actor is, like Josh Pais played a dentist in my movie Touchy Feely, and we had he had sessions with the dentist, and Mark was really helped out by the gentleman whose pawn shop we ended up using a third of. We kind of walled off a third of this giant pawn shop and used all of his stuff. Thank God. I don't know what we would have done otherwise with the budget that we had. But he also spent some time just hanging out and watching and asking questions to really get the sense of what that occupation is. But I would say that probably J. Duplass's character was the most research intense character, for sure, that I've ever tried to tackle, and really wanted to make sure we were getting emotionally and tonally right. It was interesting because I did want to, the reason that he was put in prison for 20 years was because of there is this mass incarceration, over incarceration problem in the United States. And a lot of it's a multi-phase problem, but a lot of it started with, in the 90s, this 3 strikes you're out kind of, and mandatory sentences, mandatory minimums for various things. So he got this was based on a real thing that happens, which is felony murder is actually being present when somebody else commits a murder. So the story was that he, in this, they're trying to just do, they're trying to like put a 40-ounce bottle of beer or something under their coat and like run out, but he doesn't realize that one of the goofballs that's with him has a gun, and he pulls it out. He pulls the trigger. This other guy pulls the trigger. And the only reason that J. Duplass's character gets caught is because he stays behind to help the guy who got shot. Everybody else runs away, and he's the only one that gets caught. He doesn't rat on the other people who were there, and he gets put away for 20 years because somebody's got to pay. And so even though he's the one who should not have been put away, but that happens all the time. And there's no power that the local judge has to say, okay, these are extenuating circumstances. You definitely shouldn't have been in there. It's still, maybe you should go away for 4 or 5 years or whatever, And so So I did want to make a social commentary about that, and then what happens and how hard it is to be reintegrated into society, and how you really can't be in a lot of ways. I mean, it's really, really rough to be an ex-con in this country as well, even though you've supposedly done your time, served your sentence. And so I wanted that to be an element, but I didn't want it to be the element. I didn't want it to be what the whole movie was about. So again, that was the challenge in that film, was in the editing room, trying to figure out how much of a balancing act, how long the scene with the probation officer should be before we get across what needs to get across, that kind of thing. Putting a little bit of a message in there, but not, hammering it down too hard.
So in our in the questions feed, we've got quite a few people asking about how you work in TV. So obviously TV is a great outlet for you, like I'm sure financially, because film often isn't. But you've done a vast range of stuff. So you've done Mad Men, as you mentioned, the Mindy Project, Glow, New Girl, Master of None. So a couple of questions are kind of similar, which is how do you as a director with a clear vision, how do you work on stuff where you're kind of, having to somewhat fit into a style that's already set? It's material you didn't write. Like what's the kind of virtuous circle? What's good about each medium?
It's really the exact same job. And there is this a little bit of a myth, I think, that some people, a false idea that people have, that there's not really anything to do as a director in television because of what you just said. The actors have been cast. They know their characters, especially if you come into season 4, and you're a guest director, as I was on Mad Men, for instance. The style has been set. The director of the photography knows what the visual language or the camera language is of the film, of the show. So there's really nothing for a director to do because they're not, establishing those things. But nothing could be further from the truth. It's the exact same. It's the exact same job in terms of prepping. You're given a script, and you have the script, and each scene has its own challenges. And it's in terms of what's happening emotionally, what's going on with the actors, the characters in the scene, how it has to be covered, where, and often there's a new location or a new set or something that has to be established and worked out. Where do you put the cameras? Why are you on this side of the line and on the other side of the line? Where are you putting the people in space, the bodies in space? How are they moving towards each other or not? And then most importantly, the actual nuances of finding the shape of the scene with the actors. You have the advantage of actors who really know their backstories. These are people who are deeply embedded in their characters, but that's just a starting point. Just because they know who their characters are, they don't know there's any number of things that could happen in the scene between them and the other characters, or how they play it, or what the nuances are. So you're just given that advantage of actors who actually know their backstory, but that's just, baseline. And the same with your director of photography. The cinematography knows the visual language, and the visual vocabulary as well, because you've been watching probably every other episode that's ever been, shot and broadcast of that show. So you should have as a director coming in, you should have a certain sense of what the vernacular is. But within that vernacular, you still have a ton of choices of which lenses, what camera movement, what side of the line, where, how, the lighting, all of that. You still have to make decision, huge list of decisions. Is the ashtray going to be in the foreground here? Or is it behind every little detail has to be decided on, and you're the one who has to do that. Now, you're not the creative visionary of the whole show, unless you created it, obviously. But if you're coming in as a guest director, the trick is that you have to channel somebody else's vision. So you're making all of those decisions, but all those little minuscule decisions, but you have to be thinking like the creative visionary, who can't be there usually because they're going to be That's why you're there, because Matt Weiner is off in the edit room for the last 3 episodes, and he's writing the next 3 episodes, and he's busy elsewhere. So your only opportunity to try to sponge up his brain with yours is, a tone meeting or a concept meeting, or anytime you can like grab him and ask a question about the script. And then you try and soak up what you think he would want, and then try to channel that when you're on set. So I would say that it's the same job as when you're a feature film, making your own film, but it's harder because you're trying to channel somebody else's vision. You've got to make all these little tiny decisions, the same decisions, and work with the actors in the same way, but you have to be using what the perspective, dawning somebody else's perspective. So it's a really specific and interesting job. You're bringing your own skill set, your own toolbox, your own inspiration and ideas, but you're trying to kind of use them in service of somebody else's vision. I really enjoy it a lot. I mean, first of all, it's given me health insurance and a way to make a living. And I'm extremely grateful for it. But it also gives me an opportunity to stretch my muscles as a director that I learned so much. Every single job I have as a television director, I learned an incredible amount. There were 4 years between movies when I made Laggies, and there was a 4-year stretch before I was able to make Outside In. And I did so much television. I was on set so often, and so many different sets, and working with so many different writers and actors and scripts and crews, that I can't believe how much when I got on the set of Outside In, I was like, oh my God, I'm a totally different director now. I have so much more to work with, and so much more sort of breadth of knowledge and instinctual knowledge and confidence, because I'd spent so much time on set. It was absolutely amazing. But I think about television as being like an episode of that Food Network show Chopped. I don't know if you guys have had it there, but it's basically 3 contestants are given, maybe 4. Anyway, they get culled each course, but they get given a basket of ingredients and a certain amount of time. And they have to make a dish. And it's exactly the same way, because you're handed a script, you're handed a cast, you're handed a crew, and you're given a certain amount of time, and you just have to like roll up your sleeves and be like, all right, what's the best meal I can make out of this? These obstructions I've been given. It's also easier for me, the last thing I'll say is that because I know I'm going to keep making my own movies, I don't feel like I have to impose like some mark.
Okay, that's interesting.
Really indelible mark on this television episode, because I'm going to make my own movie and I can have my own creative, vision then. But there's also some kind of a relief when you do television, having been the creative visionary for these movies. It's like, okay, that's not my mantle. I don't have to carry that burden this time. I just have to channel somebody else's and like be in service of somebody else. And as long as I really respect that creative visionary and the writers and the actors that I'm working with on the television show, it's a joy. It's a delight to just be the captain of the ship and not the admiral of the fleet.
That's such a healthy perspective, and I think it's quite refreshing actually. I don't think not many directors move so kind of effortlessly between, because of the challenges that you talked about.
Yeah, you really have to be a team player. Like you have to be okay with a truly collaborative role,
which is the antithesis of what you need to be as a feature film director. Exactly.
Yeah, for sure. But I really like it. Again, I've been very, very, very blessed, because I've really never had to work on a show that for money, or choose a show just because I'm desperate and I have to work on the show. I don't believe in it artistically. I don't really have any respect for the writers, but I have to do it. And so that makes a difference. Like I'm able to sort of pick and choose, and it might be a little bit more of a slog if I had to work on shows that just didn't feel very inspiring to me, but I've been so lucky. I've worked on just the best shows. It's just been cool.
A couple more questions. So one from Tabitha Burnett and Kelly Knight asked similar things, which was, who would you like to work with? Who is your next muse? Can you share? Actor-wise, we're talking about.
Well, I'm a little bit stuck in the Marc Maron. Oh, look, there's a picture of him right there.
Yeah, I thought I was noticing kind of a collection out back. Yeah.
Yeah. So Marc and I are currently romantically involved, and I'm in his lovely house right now. We're experiencing our quarantine lockdown together, and we have been writing a script for 4 years now. Basically from when we first worked together on his IFC show, Maron, which was the first season of that show that he had for a while. And when we worked together as an actor or director, we just like really hit it off and said, we have to work together again. And we started to write a script together. That script was going so slowly, too slowly for me. We were making headway, steady headway, but it was just taking a very long time because of our schedules and when we were able to, and I was living in a different city, and it was just hard for us to get together and work on it. And I got really frustrated at one point, and he said, well, if you know, we're going to make this movie, but if you want to do something faster, you might just have to write another movie. And that's what Sort of Trust was like the movie with Marc while we're still like slogging through our script. Well, now that we have all this time together, we've actually been working on this movie that we've been writing for 4 years together. And we're about, we're like 90 pages in. We've really got the last act outlined. We know what's going to happen. So we're really close, and going through it again and working on it again. It's a really good script. I'm very excited about it. He has a major role in it, and he's a three-hander, but he's got one of the roles. And so I'm really like, that's where my brain's at, is just, and it's interesting because Glow, which Marc is also an actor in, it was a very serendipitous thing that I happened to be, I actually was hired to direct an episode in the first season of Glow 2 months or something before he was even asked to read for that part. So that just happened to be very serendipitous.
Right.
We worked together on his show Maron, and then we worked on Glow together. Then after we worked together that second time, he asked if I would direct his comedy special Too Real, which is on Netflix. Then we worked together season 2 of Glow. And then I did 2 big episodes of the season 3 of Glow, including the finale, but he was in neither of my episodes. So it was so frustrating for me because I was so excited to work with him again. And I got to direct his last special, which just dropped like a month ago, that I highly recommend, called End Times Fun. It could not be better timed. But I really am so excited to work with him as an actor again, because it's been too long. It's been a couple years now, and I really, really want to do that. But yeah, I mean, there's a really long list of actors that I'm completely smitten with, and would be, I finally had to realize that there was no way on earth I was going to be able to work with all of them that I want to work with. But I've also had such a great run. I've already worked with such a great, an amazing number of people, and I'm very grateful for that. But yeah, I hate to. I always feel like if I mention anybody, that I will I'll just jinx it. But I definitely am. Yeah.
Okay. And just one last question, actually, which is, Lynn, I know you didn't go to film school, and neither did I, actually. So we kind of learn in other ways on the job. But one thing I think that is apparent, is how much we need to reclaim the canon of what great cinema is defined as. And because whether you go to film school or not, growing up, I kind of put myself through my own film school. And it just took me years to realize that everything was largely directed by men and written by men, and I feel like there's a big job of us reclaiming the canon, all of us, and not being so heteronormative and not being so goddamn white, and there's another canon.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, like you mentioned Claire Denis, also one of my favorites. Like, who else really inspires you that's not from the canon?
Well, actually, I saw the latest film. I think she was at Sundance. I'm pretty sure that's where she premiered this film, Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always. Have you heard of it? Did you see it?
Saw it. Amazing. Eliza Hittman.
Eliza Hittman is a huge inspiration to me. I mean, talk about authenticity. Her films feel so real and so remarkable, especially because she's working with, I actually haven't seen her second film, Beach Rats. I was blown away by her first film,
Right.
It Felt Like Love, which is also, but all three of them, because I think Beach Rats is the same, they're all with really young people, like adolescents, and mostly non-actors. And she gets these, it's like she's somehow managed, talk about establishing trust, because it feels like they've let this adult into this very insular, specific world, which is how I felt, actually, I have to say, making My Effortless Brilliance and Hump Day. I felt like I was an intruder, try not to be an intruder. I was like a fly on the wall of this world that women aren't usually let into, which is this, male domain. And I was allowed as this kind of observer. And and I have to just say that those films, I'm going to keep making films with women and men in them, because I think there is something to be said for, as you said, most films in the world have been made by men. Many of the lead characters are men, but there is a lot of women's stories that have been told by men. And I think it's equally important and valuable for women to tell their perspective of a male story. Again, I think my Hump Day was so different from Yvonne Dahl's Hump Day, because I'm a woman and I had a lens that I was able to add to that story. But at any rate, I've completely lost my train of thought.
Reclaiming that. Who else do you want to lift up?
So Eliza, just to go a little goofy on Eliza right now, a little fangirly on Eliza, the way that she's able to let us into this privileged, to this space, insular space of the adolescent sort of experience. You feel like these adolescent people have allowed her in to actually invite her into this very, very specific and very intimate space, and you get to experience what they experience. And it's very, her last film is very harrowing to me, even though, don't be scared to see it because it works out, and nothing really truly terrible happens, but it's really harrowing. And it's a really, it just is such a vulnerable, and such an important, all of her films are so important and so valuable, but her latest in particular is extremely. So that's the one that's sort of like, it's pulsating in my brain right now. But yeah, I mean, I feel like so many women, and not just women right now, but women, rediscovering women's work, film work from the last few decades. Now I'm totally blanking on. What was the name of that? Mia, what was the name of that amazing, the new wave, the Russian new wave filmmaker?
Keira Muratova, is it that one?
Yes.
Okay.
Keira Muratova, and the woman who made the film, my laptop is about to die.
What just happened there, Lynn?
Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay. My laptop was literally battery was about to die.
Oh, got it.
Sorry. I just plugged it in at the last minute. And Anya Varda.
Yep.
Oh God. Oh.
Gorgeous.
Yeah. I mean, like I didn't see Cleo from 5 to 7. Is that what it's called? Until I don't know, just a few years ago, and I was like, "This is where's it been all my life?" You know. So rediscovering films made by there's an amazing filmmaker, Shirley Jackson. Is that her name?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, who made films in the 50s and 60s, and you know, just created these films. Sort of just fought to have her voice out there, and was, you know, one of so few women just sort of kind of bushwhacking your own path, you know. So I think it's really important to acknowledge and rediscover the pioneers of the, you know, the form as well.
Yep, we do too. So Lynn, I think we should wrap there. So I wanted to just again lift up to the audience again the films that they have to see if they haven't already, which is Sword of Trust, which is the latest. You can catch Outside In on Netflix, right? And then all your classics. So Hump Day being one of my favorites, Lag Is, Your Sister's Sister, and the other ones. Plug the other ones for me.
Touchy Feely and Touchy Feely, and then I know they're available in the States. Maybe it's harder or impossible to find them in the UK. But my first two films are We Go Way Back and My Effortless Brilliance. And I think I've named them all now. Yeah. How can people say, if you already published how you can see it's Sky? How can you see Sword of Trust?
Yeah. Sword of Trust in the UK is on Sky or Now TV. Yeah. So actually we'll keep posting the link. There's a great service called Just Watch It. So for anyone who's looking for something, just go to Just Watch It and it will list in your territory all the places that you can find it. It's such a great service.
Great. I can't thank you enough for this, Mia. This was so great of you. Oh. I'm so honored, and it was a delight to talk to you.
Oh, you're an absolute delight. And there's lots of your fans. So I hope you can look in the live comments because there's a hell of a lot of beautiful commentary about you. So read that before we wrap.
I will. Okay, great.
Thank you so much, and lots of love in these strange times. It's so nice. So another virtual hug to everyone.
Yeah.
So much love.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.